They left 3 babies in an icy creek, but a Hell's Angel jumped to save them before they sank. The winter morning stretched out before Rebel like an endless white canvas. Snow blanketed the winding roads of Aspen Ridge, pristine and untouched in the early hours. His Harley rumbled beneath him, the familiar vibration a comfort he'd known for decades. The cold air bit at his exposed skin despite his heavy leather jacket, but Rebel didn't mind. The sting of winter was nothing compared to the peace he found on these solitary rides. His thick black beard collected tiny crystals of frost as he rode, and his tattooed arms remained steady on the handlebars. The morning sun barely peeked through the heavy cloud cover, casting everything in a soft, gray light that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. These were the moments Rebel lived for. Just him, his bike, and the open road. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The tall pine trees lining the route swayed gently in the morning breeze, their snow-laden branches dipping low over the road. Rebel ducked beneath them, expertly maneuvering his bike around the curves he knew by heart. He'd been riding these roads for years, finding solace in their familiar twists and turns when the weight of his past became too heavy to bear. As he rode, Rebel hummed quietly to himself, the sound mixing with the steady purr of his engine. It was an old habit, one he'd picked up during countless solo rides. The tune was nothing special, just a random melody that seemed to match the rhythm of his bike. His large frame moved in sync with the machine, each lean into a curve as natural as breathing. The snow had stopped falling, but the world remained hushed, as if holding its breath. Rebel's tires left twin tracks in the fresh powder, the only sign of human presence in this winter wonderland. He'd always preferred these early morning rides, when the rest of the world was still sleeping. Out here, no one saw the intimidating biker with his weathered face and hard eyes. Out here, he could just be himself. The road curved sharply to the right, and Rebel leaned into it, feeling the satisfying grip of his studded tires on the packed snow. The engine's rumble echoed off the rock face to his left, creating a symphony of mechanical sounds that brought a rare smile to his face. These moments of solitude helped quiet the demons that usually haunted his thoughts. As he straightened out of the curve, something changed. The peaceful morning air carried a sound that didn't belong, faint but unmistakable. Rebel's muscles tensed, his years of experience in the Hells Angels having taught him to trust his instincts. He eased off the throttle, letting the bike slow naturally as he listened more intently. There it was again, a cry carried on the wind, so soft it might have been his imagination. But Rebel knew better. He'd heard enough cries of distress in his life to recognize one when he heard it. He guided his Harley to the side of the road, killing the engine and letting the silence of the winter morning settle around him. Standing beside his bike, Rebel's eyes scanned the area. A narrow path led down from the road, disappearing into the trees below. The cry came again, clearer now in the stillness. His body tensed as he took a step toward the path, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel a storm coming, or sense trouble brewing in a crowded bar. With careful, measured steps, Rebel began making his way down the path. Despite his size, he moved quietly, years of experience having taught him how to stay silent when needed. The morning's peace had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of unease that settled in his gut like a lead weight. The path wound downward through the trees, growing steeper with each step. Rebel's boots slid on patches of ice hidden beneath the snow, forcing him to grab onto low-hanging branches for balance. The sound that had caught his attention grew clearer, definitely crying, but weak and faltering. As he rounded a bend in the path, the trees opened up to reveal a small creek below. The usually gentle stream had swollen with winter melt, its dark waters churning against ice-crusted banks. Rebel's heart stopped when he spotted them. 3 tiny forms in the water, partially submerged against a fallen log. "Dear God," he whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air. 3 toddlers, none of them looking older than 3 years old, lay trapped in the icy water. Their small bodies wore only thin pajamas, now soaked and freezing against their blue-tinted skin. One child's arm clung weakly to the log, while the other stayed huddled close, their movements growing slower by the second. The sight hit Rebel like a physical blow. These babies hadn't wandered here on their own. Someone had left them to die. The thought made his hands clench into fists, his jaw tightening with rage. But there was no time for anger now. Those children wouldn't last much longer in the freezing water. The creek bank was steep and slippery, covered in a treacherous mix of snow and ice. Rebel scrambled down as quickly as he dared, his large frame working against him as he tried to keep his footing. One of the children spotted him and tried to cry out, but the sound came out as little more than a whimper. "Hold on," Rebel called, his gruff voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. "I'm coming. Just hold on." The icy water swirled around the fallen log, creating small whirlpools that threatened to pull the children under. Their clothing had frozen in places, sticking to the bark of the log. The smallest child's eyes were starting to close, head drooping toward the water surface. Rebel didn't hesitate. He plunged into the creek, gasping as the freezing water soaked through his jeans and boots. The current was stronger than he'd expected, pushing against his legs as he waded toward the children. The cold hit him like thousands of tiny knives, but he forced himself forward. He reached the first child, a little girl with dark hair plastered to her face. Her skin felt like ice as he carefully pried her frozen pajamas free from the log. She didn't resist as he lifted her, too weak from the cold to move. With careful steps against the current, Rebel carried her to the bank and laid her on his leather jacket, which he'd thrown down moments before. The second child, a boy, began crying in earnest as Rebel returned to the water. The sound, though heartbreaking, was actually encouraging. It meant the boy still had strength left. Rebel's hands shook from the cold as he lifted the second toddler, his muscles starting to cramp from the freezing water. The third and smallest child had stopped moving entirely. Rebel's heart pounded as he pushed through the water one final time. His fingers had gone numb, making it harder to grip the tiny form, but he managed to lift the last toddler free from the creek. The child's skin had taken on a frightening bluish tinge, but Rebel could feel a faint pulse as he cradled the small body against his chest. His own body trembling violently from the cold, Rebel gathered all three children close, trying to shield them from the bitter wind with his massive frame. Their tiny bodies felt like ice against his skin, their breathing shallow and irregular. Rebel gathered the shivering children in his arms, wrapping them tightly in his leather jacket. His motorcycle stood waiting at the top of the hill, but he knew the wind from the ride would be too harsh for the toddlers in their fragile state. He had to find help, and fast. His mind raced as he trudged through the snow, holding the children close to his chest. Their small bodies felt like ice against him, their wet clothes starting to freeze in the bitter cold. The smallest one hadn't made a sound since being pulled from the water, while the other two whimpered softly. "Stay with me, little ones," Rebel muttered, his voice rough with worry. His eyes scanned the road ahead, searching for any sign of help. The emergency assistance center wasn't far. He'd passed it countless times on his rides through town, but had never given it much thought until now. The weight of the three children made his arms ache, but Rebel refused to slow down. Each labored breath from the toddlers sent a spike of fear through his heart. He'd seen enough in his life to know how quickly hypothermia could turn deadly, especially in one so small. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, a small building came into view. The sign read, "Aspen Ridge Emergency Assistance Center," in faded blue letters. A wave of relief washed over Rebel as he saw lights on inside. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars, their windows frosted over. Rebel's boots crunched in the fresh snow as he hurried toward the entrance. The smallest child stirred slightly in his arms. A good sign, but they needed help immediately. Rebel kicked the door with his boot, unable to free a hand to open it. "Help!" he called out, his deep voice echoing in the quiet morning air. I need help here." Through the glass door, he saw movement. A woman appeared, her eyes widening at the sight of him. Rebel knew what she saw. A huge man in wet clothes, covered in tattoos, holding 3 small children. He probably looked terrifying, but he didn't care. The door opened quickly, and the woman, Clara, according to her name tag, gasped at the sight of the children. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for the nearest child. "Found them in the creek," Rebel said, his voice shaking slightly from the cold. "Someone left them there. They're freezing." Clara's professional demeanor took over as she assessed the situation. "Bring them in quickly," she ordered, leading the way inside. The warm air hit Rebel's face as he followed her, carrying the 2 remaining children. "We need to get them out of these wet clothes immediately," Clara said, already moving toward a back room. "They need medical attention. I'm calling an ambulance." Rebel stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. The children had been his responsibility from the moment he'd spotted them in that creek, but now... He watched as Clara efficiently took charge, her movements quick but gentle as she wrapped the smallest child in a warm blanket. "Wait outside," Clara told him firmly but kindly. "I'll handle this. They're in good hands now." Rebel hesitated, his protective instincts warring with the knowledge that he needed to let the professionals take over. The 2 older children watched him with wide, frightened eyes as Clara tended to them. "Go on," Clara said, her voice softer this time. "We'll take good care of them." Rebel nodded slowly and stepped back into the waiting room. His clothes were still soaking wet, leaving puddles on the floor as he paced. From beyond the door, he could hear Clara's calm voice, speaking to the children, the sound of medical equipment being moved, and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Clara's hands moved swiftly, but gently as she checked each child's vital signs. The emergency room would be better equipped to handle their condition. But for now, she needed to keep them warm and stable. She wrapped them in thermal blankets, watching their small bodies shiver beneath the layers. The smallest one, a girl no more than 2, clutched weakly at the blanket with tiny fingers that were still blue from the cold. Next to her, a boy about 3 years old had started to cry softly, his tears leaving trails on his dirt-streaked face. The third child, another boy, lay quietly, his eyes half closed. As Clara turned to check this quiet boy's temperature again, something caught her eye. There, on his upper arm, was a distinctive mark she'd seen before, a heart-shaped birthmark about the size of a quarter. Her hands froze mid-motion as recognition hit her. "Danny?" she whispered, leaning closer to examine the mark. Her heart began to race as memories from a recent case file flashed through her mind. She'd seen this birthmark in photographs, had noted it specifically in her reports about the Rivers family's adoption. The boy's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his name. Despite his weakened state, there was a flash of recognition in them. Clara felt her stomach twist into knots as she looked more carefully at all 3 children. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see it clearly. These were the Rivers children, the ones they'd adopted just months ago. Clara glanced toward the waiting room, where the big biker still paced. She could see his shadow moving back and forth through the frosted glass. How had these children ended up in that creek? The Rivers were one of the wealthiest families in Aspen Ridge, living in that huge house up on Miller's Hill. But there had been rumors, hadn't there? Whispers about the Rivers that Clara had tried to investigate. Strange reports from neighbors about crying in the night, questions about their finances that never quite added up. She'd done several home visits, but Mrs. Rivers always had a perfectly rehearsed explanation for everything. Danny whimpered softly, drawing Clara's attention back to the present. She stroked his damp hair gently, noting how he flinched at her touch. That reaction told her more than any report could have. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Clara moved quickly to the phone on the wall, dialing the number for Child Protective Services. As she waited for someone to answer, she watched the children huddled together under their blankets. They seemed so small, so vulnerable. "This is Clara Matthews at the Aspen Ridge Emergency Center," she said when the line connected. "I need to report an emergency situation involving the Rivers family's adopted children." She kept her voice low, glancing again at the waiting room door. "Yes, all three of them. They were found in Hawks Creek, suffering from exposure and possible hypothermia." As she provided the necessary details, Clara felt a heavy weight settling in her chest. She knew the system, knew how these cases often played out. The Rivers had money and influence. They'd have the best lawyers, would know exactly what to say to paint themselves as victims. Danny's eyes met hers across the room, wide and frightened. Clara finished her call and walked back to the children, sitting beside their cots as the ambulance pulled up outside. She reached for Danny's small hand, and this time he didn't flinch away. The sense of dread grew stronger as she heard the paramedics entering the building. These children needed protection, but from what or whom, she wasn't entirely sure yet. Rebel stood in the doorway of the children's hospital room, his massive frame filling the space. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, but his eyes remained fixed on the three small figures tucked into their beds. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring their vital signs. The doctors had said they would recover, but Rebel couldn't shake the image of their blue-tinged skin from his mind. He moved into the room, settling his bulk into a chair that seemed too small for him. His leather vest creaked as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. One of the children, the little girl, stirred in her sleep, whimpering softly. Without thinking, Rebel reached out and gently patted her hand until she settled. Clara watched from the nurse's station, noting how the tough biker's face softened when he looked at the children. She gathered her paperwork and walked into the room, her footsteps quiet on the linoleum floor. "You don't have to stay," she said softly, settling into a chair across from him. "They're safe now." Rebel shook his head, his beard brushing against his chest. "Can't leave 'em," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Not until I know what happened." "Who would do this to kids?" Clara sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. "The system isn't perfect, but we'll protect them." "The system?" Rebel's laugh was bitter. "I know all about the system." He fell quiet, his gaze distant. After a moment, he continued, "Foster homes, group homes, spent my whole childhood bouncing between them. Nobody wanted the angry kid with too many problems." Clara watched his face, noting the pain that flickered across it. "What happened?" "Dad was a drunk. Mom split when I was 5. Dad ended up in prison and I—" He trailed off, absently rubbing one of his tattoos. "Well, the street seemed better than another foster home. Found the Angels when I was 17. First time I felt like I belonged somewhere." The room fell quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Danny shifted in his sleep, clutching his blanket tighter. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "I understand feeling alone," she said finally. "After Mark, my husband, died last year, everything felt empty. We'd talked about having kids, but then—" She blinked rapidly, pushing back tears. "Now I try to help other children instead." "How'd it happen?" Rebel asked quietly. "Car accident. Black ice on Miller's Hill." Clara's voice wavered slightly. "He was coming home from work. They said it was quick, that he didn't suffer. But sometimes I still wake up reaching for him." Rebel nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Loss changes you," he said. "Makes you see things different." He looked at the sleeping children. "Like these little ones. Can't explain it, but when I pulled them from that creek, felt like maybe there was a reason I was there." "Sometimes the worst moments lead us where we need to be," Clara said softly. They sat in companionable silence, watching over the sleeping children as the night settled around them. Clara sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files and a cooling cup of coffee. The dim glow of her computer screen illuminated her tired face as she scrolled through document after document about the Rivers family. Her fingers tapped nervously on her desk, as each new detail painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "This can't be right," she muttered, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. The financial records showed massive transfers of money between multiple accounts, amounts that didn't match the Rivers' reported income from their real estate business. She picked up another file, this one containing interviews with former household staff. A nanny's statement caught her eye. "Mrs. Rivers never let me near the children after hours. Sometimes I'd hear crying at night, but when I tried to check on them, she'd appear out of nowhere and send me home." Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her coffee. The liquid had gone cold, but she barely noticed as she took a sip. Her eyes moved to another report, a school teacher's concern about Danny's unexplained absences and suspicious bruises. The office door creaked open, and Rebel's large frame filled the doorway. "Found anything?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Clara gestured to the chair across from her desk. "It's worse than I thought." She spread out several documents. "Look at these bank statements. The Rivers claim to make their money through real estate, but these transactions—" She pointed to a series of numbers. "They're moving millions through shell companies." Rebel leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on her desk. "Money laundering. That's what it looks like." Clara pulled out another file. "And the adoption records? They're full of inconsistencies. The paperwork from the overseas orphanage is incomplete, possibly forged. It's like they're hiding where these children really came from." "Bastards," Rebel growled, his fists clenching. "They're using those kids as a cover." Clara nodded, running her fingers through her hair. "There's more. Former employees reported signs of neglect. The children were often locked in their rooms, barely fed. One housekeeper quit after finding Danny locked in a closet for hours." Rebel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm gonna kill them," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Those monsters deserve—" "No," Clara interrupted, standing up and placing a hand on his arm. "We have to do this the right way. If we move too fast, or break any laws, they could slip through our fingers." She met his fierce gaze with her own determined one. "These documents are enough to start an official investigation. We can bring them down legally." Rebel's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck taut with tension. "The law didn't help me when I was a kid. Why should I trust it now?" "Because this time you're not alone," Clara said firmly. "I know the system isn't perfect, but I know how to work within it. These papers?" She tapped the stack of documents. "There are weapons, more powerful than fists or threats." She watched as some of the tension left his shoulders, though anger still smoldered in his eyes. "Those children deserve justice," she continued. "Real justice, not revenge that could backfire and hurt them more." Rebel dropped heavily back into his chair, running a hand through his beard. "Fine," he conceded. "We'll do it your way. But if they try to hurt those kids again—" "Then we'll stop them," Clara said. "Legally, together." She gathered the most damning documents into a folder, her hands steady, despite the weight of what they'd discovered. The Rivers' perfect facade was crumbling, revealing the rot beneath. Now they just had to make sure justice was served, the right way. Rebel pulled his motorcycle into the dimly lit parking lot of the Devil's Fork, a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a red glow on the row of motorcycles parked outside. He recognized most of them, bikes belonging to his old crew from the Hells Angels. Inside, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Familiar faces turned to watch him enter, some nodding in recognition, others maintaining the guarded expression that came naturally to men in their line of work. Rebel made his way to the bar, where Snake, an old friend with graying hair and a serpent tattoo coiling up his neck, was nursing a beer. "Been a while, brother," Snake said, sliding a fresh bottle toward Rebel. "Thought you'd gone straight on us." Rebel took a long pull from his beer. "Need some information," he said quietly. "About a couple named Rivers. Rich folks, living up in the hills." Snake's expression darkened. "Bad business, those two." He glanced around before continuing. Word is they've got connections all over. Dirty money flowing through clean-looking accounts. At a corner table, Rebel spotted Hawk, another longtime member who worked security for some of the city's wealthiest residents. He moved through the crowd, settling into the chair across from him. "The Rivers," Rebel said without preamble. "What do you know?" Hawk leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "They host these fancy parties, right? But after the regular guests leave, different people show up. Cars with diplomatic plates, guys in expensive suits carrying briefcases." He took a drag from his cigarette. "My buddy works their security system. Says they've got rooms in that mansion nobody's allowed to enter, not even the cleaning staff." For the next hour, Rebel moved from contact to contact, piecing together a disturbing puzzle. The Rivers weren't just wealthy socialites. They were players in something much bigger. Money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. "Those kids they adopted?" A prospect named Joey added, his young face serious. "They ain't the first. There were others before, but nobody knows what happened to them." Rebel's stomach turned. He thought of the 3 toddlers he'd pulled from the creek, their tiny bodies nearly frozen. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a message. Back on his bike, Rebel's mind raced. The Rivers were connected to something dark, something that reached far beyond their perfect mansion and social circle. He gunned the engine, heading back to the shelter where Clara would be waiting. The parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived, save for Clara's blue sedan. Inside, he found her in her office, her face pale and drawn. Papers were scattered across her desk, and her hands shook as she looked up at him. "They called," she said, her voice trembling. "The Rivers. They've filed emergency custody papers demanding the children back." She pushed a document toward him. "They're claiming the children were kidnapped, that you took them." Rebel's jaw clenched. "That's not possible. You saw the condition they were in when I found them." "They've got lawyers, Rebel. Expensive ones." Clara ran her fingers through her hair. "They're saying you staged the whole thing, that you're trying to extort them." She looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes. "They've already contacted Child Services. There's going to be a hearing." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Rebel processed this information. Everything he'd learned at the bar, all the dark secrets and whispered rumors. And now this. A legal attack aimed at discrediting him and forcing the children back into danger. Clara's hands were still shaking as she gathered the papers. "What did you find out?" she asked quietly. Clara's office phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tense silence. Her hand trembled as she reached for the receiver, somehow knowing who would be on the other end. Rebel stood nearby, his massive frame casting a shadow across her desk. "Clara Rivers speaking," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Miss Rivers." The woman's voice was cold and precise, like ice cracking. "This is Margaret Rivers. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Clara's stomach nodded. "Mrs. Rivers, Let me be perfectly clear," Margaret cut in. "Those children are legally ours. We have all the proper documentation, signed and certified by the courts. What's happening right now is nothing short of kidnapping." Clara gripped the phone tighter. "Mrs. Rivers, the children were found abandoned in freezing water. They could have died." A sharp laugh came through the receiver. "Is that what that criminal told you? That tattooed thug who's been hanging around? We have witnesses who saw him take our children." "That's not what happened. Those children are our property." Margaret's voice rose, losing its cultured edge. "We paid good money for them, and we will get them back. Do you understand me?" Clara's blood ran cold at the word paid. She caught Rebel's eye, and he stepped closer, his presence reassuring. "They're not property," Clara said firmly. "They're children who need protection." "Listen carefully." Margaret's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're a social worker with a spotless record. It would be a shame if something were to tarnish that. Perhaps some evidence of misconduct? Or worse?" Clara's hand began to shake so badly she had to switch the phone to her other ear. Are you threatening me? I'm simply stating facts. Return our children by tomorrow morning, or you'll find out exactly how much influence we have in this town." The line went dead. Clara set the phone down carefully, as if it might bite her. She looked up at Rebel, who had moved even closer to her desk. "They want the children back by morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said they paid for them. Actually used the word paid." Rebel's jaw clenched, the muscles working beneath his beard. His tattooed hands gripped the back of the chair in front of him. "Did they threaten you?" Clara nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "They said they have witnesses who saw you kidnap the children. They're going to try to destroy my career if I don't comply." She blinked back tears. "What are we going to do?" Rebel came around the desk, his heavy boots silent on the carpet. He knelt beside her chair, and despite his intimidating size, his presence felt protective rather than threatening. "Listen to me, Clara. Those kids aren't going anywhere near the rivers. Not while I'm breathing. But they have money, influence. And we have the truth," Rebel said firmly. "Those babies were half dead when I found them. We have medical records, photographs, witness statements from the doctors." He reached out and gently took her trembling hands in his. "I've seen evil before, Clara. I know what it looks like. And I promise you, I won't let them hurt you or those children." Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the steel behind them, the absolute conviction in his words. She squeezed his rough hands, drawing strength from his certainty. "What's our next move?" "We prepare," Rebel said, standing up. "We document everything. We get security cameras installed here at the shelter. And we make sure those kids are protected around the clock." He pulled out his phone. "I know some people who owe me favors. Good people, despite their rough edges. We're not in this alone." The shelter was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heating system. Rebel sat in an old armchair near the children's room, his large frame making the furniture seem small. The hallway's dim nightlights cast long shadows, but he didn't mind. He'd spent plenty of nights keeping watch before. Through the half-open door, he could see the 3 toddlers sleeping peacefully in their cribs. Danny, the one with the birthmark, clutched a stuffed bear Clara had given him. The sight of them, safe and warm, made his chest tight with an unfamiliar feeling. The soft padding of footsteps made him turn. Clara approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee, her sock-covered feet silent on the carpet. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, an oversized sweater and jeans, and let her hair down from its usual neat bun. "Thought you might need this," she whispered, offering him a cup. "Thanks." His voice was rough from hours of silence. The coffee was exactly how he liked it, black and strong. Clara settled into the chair next to his, tucking her feet under her. "They're sleeping better tonight," she said, nodding toward the children. "Yeah." Rebel watched as one of the little ones stirred and then settled again. "First time I've seen them really peaceful since—" He trailed off, remembering the icy creek. "You know," Clara said softly, "I lost my husband 2 years ago. Car accident." She stared into her coffee cup. "I thought I'd never feel whole again. But these kids, they have a way of healing your heart, don't they?" Rebel nodded slowly. "Never had kids of my own. Always thought I'd be no good at it, given my childhood." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "My old man. He wasn't exactly father of the year. Left when I was 8. Mom checked out after that. Pills, mostly." Clara reached over and touched his arm gently. The warmth of her hand seemed to seep through his leather jacket. "But you're nothing like them. Look at how you saved these children. Look at how you're protecting them now." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just fooling myself," Rebel admitted, "trying to play hero when I've got more darkness in my past than I can count." "We all have regrets," Clara said. "I regret not telling my husband I loved him that morning. I regret being too focused on my career sometimes." She took a sip of her coffee. But regret doesn't define us. It's what we choose to do next that matters. Rebel studied her face in the dim light. There was no judgment there, no fear of his rough exterior or his past. Just understanding and a kindness that seemed to radiate from within. "You're stronger than you look," he said softly. "Most people would have run from this mess. But here you are, risking everything for these kids." Clara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "So are you. Most people wouldn't have jumped into that creek. Most people wouldn't be sitting here all night standing guard." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching over the sleeping children. The night felt less lonely somehow, less threatening. In Clara's presence, Rebel felt his usual tension begin to ease, like a knot slowly unraveling. When Clara finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for staying, for helping, for caring." Rebel looked at her, this woman who had lost so much, yet still had so much love to give. "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "Not many people do." The neon sign of the Lucky Horseshoe Tavern flickered weakly in the gray morning light. Rebel parked his motorcycle in the nearly empty lot, scanning the surroundings with practiced eyes. This dive bar, tucked away in the outskirts of town, was exactly the kind of place someone might go to disappear. His contact in the Angels had tipped him off about Marcus Webb, a former accountant for the Rivers who'd vanished 3 months ago. After some digging through his old networks, Rebel had tracked him here, working as a part-time bartender under a different name. The bar's door creaked as Rebel stepped inside. The place smelled of stale beer and desperation. A few early morning regulars hunched over their drinks, not even bothering to look up. Behind the bar, a thin man with graying hair was wiping glasses with mechanical precision. "We're not serving food yet," the man said without looking up. "Not here for food, Marcus," Rebel replied quietly. The glass in Marcus's hand slipped, clattering against the bar, but not breaking. His face went pale as he finally looked at Rebel, taking in his imposing frame and leather jacket. I don't know any, Marcus," he stammered. "Yeah, you do." Rebel settled onto a bar stool, keeping his voice low. "And we need to talk about the Rivers." Marcus's hands trembled as he set down another glass. "They'll kill me if they find out I talked." "They'll have to get through me first." Rebel leaned forward. 3 kids, Marcus. They left them to die in a creek. I need to know what you know." Marcus glanced around nervously, then gestured toward a back room. "Not here. Too many ears." The storage room was cramped and dimly lit. Marcus paced between boxes of liquor, running his hands through his thinning hair. "I was their accountant for 5 years, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "At first, it was just normal books. Then I started noticing irregularities. Large sums moving through shell companies, fake charitable donations, missing money from their foundation." "The adoption agency?" Rebel asked. Marcus nodded. "That's how they do it. They use the adoption agency as a front. The money, it's not just laundering. They're trafficking children, Rebel. Finding desperate families overseas, promising them better lives for their kids, then—" He swallowed hard. "The kids disappear into the system. The paperwork gets lost, and the Rivers profit." Rebel's fists clenched. "Those 3 I found. Must have been a deal gone wrong." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "Maybe the buyers backed out, or the kids were too old. The Rivers don't leave loose ends." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "The Rivers own half the force in this county. I tried to gather evidence, but they caught me. Threatened my family." His eyes grew distant. "I ran. Changed my name. But they're everywhere, Rebel. They have connections you wouldn't believe. Politicians, judges, business leaders." "I need proof," Rebel said. Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his wallet. Inside was a small key. "Storage unit. Downtown. Number 247. I kept copies of everything." His hand shook as he handed over the key. "But listen to me. They're dangerous. They'll kill anyone who threatens their operation, and they won't stop until they get those kids back." Rebel pocketed the key. "They can try." "You don't understand." Marcus grabbed Rebel's arm. "They're not just rich people playing criminal. They're criminals playing rich people. They've killed before. They'll do it again." Rebel shrugged off Marcus's grip and headed for the door. He had what he needed. It was time to get back to Clara and the kids. The weight of the storage unit key felt heavy in his pocket, but not as heavy as the responsibility he carried for those 3 innocent lives. The shelter's quiet evening routine shattered when the front doors burst open. 3 men in dark suits entered first, their stances rigid and professional. Behind them strode Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, dressed in expensive winter coats that seemed out of place in the humble shelter. Mrs. Rivers' heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she approached the front desk. Her perfectly made-up face twisted into a sneer as she surveyed the worn furniture and dated decor. "We're here for our children," she announced, her voice sharp and commanding. Mr. Rivers stood beside her, his silver hair immaculate, and his cold eyes scanning the room. "Where are they being kept?" Rebel, who had been reading to the toddlers in the playroom, heard the commotion. He gently set down the picture book and patted Danny's head. "Stay here, buddy. Keep an eye on your sisters." He emerged from the playroom, his large frame filling the hallway. The bodyguards tensed at his appearance, their hands moving subtly toward their jackets. "The kids aren't going anywhere," Rebel said, his voice low but firm. He planted himself between the Rivers and the playroom door, crossing his tattooed arms across his chest. Mrs. Rivers' eyes widened with disgust. "Who is this person?" She turned to one of the shelter workers. "How dare you let someone like him near our children? Those children you left to freeze to death?" Rebel's words cut through the air like ice. "The ones I pulled from that creek." Mr. Rivers stepped forward, his expensive cologne failing to mask the stench of his contempt. "We don't know what you're talking about. Those are our legally adopted children, and we have the paperwork to prove it." One of the bodyguards moved toward the playroom, but Rebel shifted to block his path. The tension in the room crackled like electricity before a storm. "Move aside," the guard ordered. "Make me," Rebel replied, his voice deadly quiet. Clara burst through the side door, her cheeks flushed from running. She'd been in her office when she heard the commotion. "Stop right there!" She held up her hand, her social worker badge clearly visible. "Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, you have no legal right to be here." "We have every right," Mrs. Rivers spat. "We have adoption papers." "Which are currently under investigation," Clara interrupted, her professional demeanor masking her anger. "The children are in protective custody pending an investigation into allegations of abuse and neglect. You cannot remove them without a court order." Mr. Rivers' face reddened. "Do you know who we are? Who we know in this town?" "Yes," Clara replied steadily. "I know exactly who you are, and I know that if you don't leave these premises immediately, I'll have to call the police to report harassment and attempted kidnapping." The Rivers exchanged glances. Behind them, their bodyguards shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't over," Mrs. Rivers hissed, adjusting her designer scarf. "We'll be back with our lawyers." "And we'll be ready," Rebel growled. Mr. Rivers grabbed his wife's arm, steering her toward the door. The bodyguards followed, backing away slowly, their eyes never leaving Rebel's imposing figure. As the doors swung shut behind them, Clara released a shaky breath. Through the window, they watched the Rivers climb into their luxury SUV and drive away into the gathering darkness. Rebel paced the shelter's dimly lit break room, his heavy boots marking a path on the worn linoleum floor. His hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the surge of familiar rage that coursed through his veins. The confrontation with the rivers had awakened something dark inside him, something he'd tried to bury years ago. He stopped at the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Snow was falling again, fat flakes drifting past the streetlight. The peaceful scene outside stood in stark contrast to the storm raging within him. "I could have handled them," he muttered to himself, his breath fogging the window. "Should have handled them." His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white with tension. The old instincts screamed at him to hunt them down, to make them pay for what they'd done to those innocent children. Memories flooded back. The crack of his father's belt, his mother's quiet sobs in the night, the helplessness he'd felt as a child. He'd sworn never to be powerless again, and the Hells Angels had given him the means to keep that promise. Violence had become his shield, his answer to every threat. But violence had also cost him everything he'd ever loved. His mind drifted to Sarah, his younger sister, who he'd failed to protect from their father's rage. By the time he'd learned to fight back, she was already gone, lost to the streets and the darkness that claimed so many broken souls. "Rebel!" Clara's soft voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "The children are asking for you. Danny won't go to sleep without his bedtime story." Rebel turned, and the fluorescent lights revealed the torment in his eyes. "I'm not safe to be around them right now, Clara. You saw me earlier. One wrong move from those guards, and I would have—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "But you didn't," Clara said, stepping closer. "You showed restraint. The old rebel might have thrown the first punch, but you didn't." "You don't know what I'm capable of," he growled, more in pain than anger. "The things I've done. I was supposed to protect Sarah, and I failed. What if I fail these kids too?" Clara crossed the room and, without hesitation, placed her hand on his arm. The gentle touch seemed to drain some of the tension from his massive frame. "The past doesn't define who you are now," she said firmly. "I see how you are with those children. You read them stories, you make them laugh, you dry their tears. That's not the actions of a violent man. That's the love of a father." Rebel's breath caught in his throat. "A father?" he whispered, the word foreign on his tongue. "Yes." Clara smiled softly. "You're not that angry young man anymore. You're someone who chose to dive into freezing water to save 3 strangers. Someone who stayed by their side. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to." The truth of her words settled over him like a warm blanket. He thought of Danny's trusting smile, of the way the little girls reached for him with their tiny hands. They didn't see a dangerous ex-biker. They saw safety, protection, love. "Maybe," he said slowly, "maybe there's a way to be strong without being dangerous, to protect without destroying." "There is," Clara assured him, her hand still steady on his arm. "And you're already doing it." Clara sat at her desk in the shelter's office, absently shuffling through case files. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, but she barely noticed the passing time. Her thoughts kept drifting to Rebel, his gentle way with the children, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his past, the warmth of his rare smiles. She pulled out Danny's file, trying to focus on the work at hand. But even the familiar routine of paperwork couldn't quiet the storm in her mind. The image of Rebel standing protectively in front of the children during the Rivers confrontation kept replaying in her thoughts. "This is completely unprofessional," she muttered to herself. Pushing away from her desk, she walked to the window, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. Outside, she could see Rebel in the playground, pushing one of the little girls on the swing. His massive frame looked almost comical next to the tiny playground equipment, but there was nothing funny about the tenderness in his actions. Her heart squeezed. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the objective social worker, focused solely on the children's welfare. Instead, she found herself looking forward to their quiet conversations, cherishing those moments when his guard dropped, and he let her see the man behind the tough exterior. Clara's gaze drifted to the small, silver frame on her desk. Tom's smiling face looked back at her, frozen in time at their last anniversary celebration. She picked up the photo, her fingers tracing the familiar features of her late husband's face. "What would you think of all this, Tom?" she whispered, sinking into her chair. "He's nothing like you. You were all clean-cut suits and careful planning. Well, he's a former Hell's Angel with tattoos and a beard." She could almost hear Tom's gentle laugh, could imagine him telling her to stop overthinking everything. That had always been his way, to balance out her tendency to analyze every decision to death. "The children need stability," she argued with the photo. "They need someone dependable, someone safe." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Rebel, despite his rough past, had proven himself more dependable than many respectable people she knew. A peal of childish laughter drifted through the window. Clara looked out to see Rebel now sitting cross-legged on the ground, letting the toddlers climb all over him like a human jungle gym. His deep chuckle joined their giggles, and something in Clara's chest ached with longing. "I miss you so much, Tom," she whispered to the photo, feeling tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "But I think my heart is ready to love again. Even if it scares me. Even if it's complicated and messy and nothing like what we had." She set the photo down gently, wiping her eyes. The truth she'd been fighting finally surfaced. She was falling for Rebel. Not because he was trying to be someone else, but because of exactly who he was. A man working to overcome his past, who showed such genuine care for these abandoned children, who made her feel safe and understood in a way she hadn't felt since losing Tom. Clara stood up, squaring her shoulders as she watched Rebel and the children through the window. She couldn't deny her feelings any longer, couldn't keep hiding behind her professional role or her fears. Whatever happened next, she had to be honest, with herself and with Rebel. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shelter's parking lot as Rebel stood, arms crossed, watching the river's sleek black SUV pull up. His jaw clenched at the sight of their designer clothes and perfectly manicured appearances as they stepped out of their vehicle. Mr. Rivers adjusted his expensive suit jacket, while Mrs. Rivers smoothed her silk blouse. They looked more like they were heading to a country club than confronting a former Hell's Angel over their adopted children. "Mr. Rebel, is it?" Mr. Rivers' voice dripped with condescension. "Let's discuss this like civilized people." Rebel didn't move from his position blocking the shelter's entrance. "Nothing to discuss. Those kids aren't going anywhere with you." Mrs. Rivers stepped forward, her high heels clicking against the pavement. "We have legal documentation. Those children are rightfully ours." She pulled out a thick manila envelope from her designer purse. "Our lawyers have prepared everything. The adoption papers are ironclad." "Paperwork bought with dirty money doesn't mean anything," Rebel growled, his voice low and dangerous. Mr. Rivers' pleasant facade cracked slightly. "Listen here, you leather-wearing thug. Do you have any idea who we are? What kind of resources we have at our disposal?" "I know exactly who you are," Rebel said, taking a step forward. His massive frame towered over Mr. Rivers, who unconsciously stepped back. "You're the kind of people who'd leave 3 innocent kids to freeze to death in a creek." Mrs. Rivers' face whitened. "That's a serious accusation. We could sue you for slander." "Go ahead," Rebel challenged. "I've got nothing to lose. But you—" He fixed them with a hard stare. "You've got everything to lose, don't you?" Mr. Rivers's face reddened. "We can make your life very difficult. One phone call, and we can have every law enforcement agency investigating your past activities. How clean is your record, Mr. Rebel?" Rebel didn't flinch. "My past isn't pretty, but at least I own up to it. Unlike you two, hiding behind your money and fancy lawyers." "Be reasonable," Mrs. Rivers tried again, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold. We can make this worth your while. Name your price." "Those kids aren't for sale," Rebel snarled, his patience wearing thin. "And if you think you can threaten or bribe me into giving them up, you don't know me at all." Mr. Rivers stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making a terrible mistake. We have connections you couldn't imagine. People who owe us favors. This won't end well for you." "Maybe not," Rebel agreed, his voice steady. "But it'll end a whole lot worse for you if anything happens to those kids." The Rivers exchanged glances, reading the unmovable determination in Rebel's stance. Mrs. Rivers tugged at her husband's sleeve. "Charles, let's go. We'll handle this through proper channels." Mr. Rivers straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "This isn't over. You're playing a dangerous game, and you're going to lose." "We'll see about that," Rebel replied, watching as they retreated to their SUV. The vehicle's engine purred to life, and the Rivers pulled away, leaving nothing but the acrid smell of exhaust in the air. Rebel's shoulders remained tense as he watched them disappear around the corner. He knew this was just the beginning. The Rivers wouldn't give up easily. They had money, power, and influence on their side. But Rebel had something stronger: the determination to protect 3 innocent lives, no matter the cost. Clara paced the small office at the back of the shelter, her fingers twisting nervously. The afternoon light filtered through dusty blinds, casting striped shadows across scattered papers and coffee cups. Rebel sat in a worn chair, his large frame making the furniture seem smaller than it was. "We need to get them somewhere safe," Clara said, stopping to lean against her desk. "The Rivers have connections everywhere in town. It's not just about legal custody anymore. It's about keeping them alive." Rebel nodded, his dark eyes focused on a spot on the floor. "I know some people, off-the-grid types. They could help us disappear for a while." Clara shook her head. "We have to do this legally, Rebel. If we don't, we're just giving the Rivers ammunition to use against us." She pulled out a thick manual from her desk drawer. "There's a procedure for emergency protective custody. If we can prove the children are in immediate danger, those kids were left to die in that creek." Rebel's voice roughened with anger. "Isn't that proof enough?" "We need documentation, evidence." Clara flipped through the pages. "Medical reports from when you brought them in, photographs of their condition, witness statements." She looked up at him. "Your testimony would be crucial." Rebel shifted uncomfortably. "You want me to testify? With my record?" "Your past doesn't matter here," Clara said softly. "What matters is what you did for those children. You saved their lives, Rebel." He stood up and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "There's a safe house in Montana. Used to be a retreat for guys in the club who needed to lay low. It's isolated, hard to find unless you know where to look." "Montana?" Clara's eyes widened. "That's crossing state lines. We'd need special permission, court orders." "Then get them." Rebel turned to face her. "You know the system, Clara. I know how to keep them safe. We both want the same thing." Clara sank into her chair, running her hands through her hair. "It won't be easy. We'll need to coordinate with child services in Montana, arrange for temporary guardianship, set up medical care." She grabbed a notepad and started writing furiously. "I'll handle the practical stuff," Rebel said. "Security, supplies, transportation, making sure no one follows us." Clara looked up at him, her pen pausing mid-sentence. "Us? You don't think I'm letting you take those kids alone, do you?" His voice was gentle but firm. "They need both of us, Clara." She felt her chest tighten with emotion. Here was this man, who'd lived such a different life from her own, willing to risk everything for 3 children he barely knew. "You understand what you're getting into? This isn't just about keeping them safe for a few days. This could be weeks, months." "I understand perfectly." Rebel moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "Those kids deserve a chance at a real life, And if that means starting over somewhere else, then that's what we'll do. Clara stood up, facing him. I'll start the paperwork today. We'll need to move fast, before the Rivers can block us legally. How long? 3 days. Maybe 4, if we're lucky. She met his gaze. Are you sure about this, Rebel? Really sure? His weathered face softened as he looked at her. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about something. They stood there in the quiet office, the weight of their decision settling around them. Clara felt something shift between them, a deepening of trust, a shared purpose that went beyond professional duty or simple kindness. These children had brought them together, and now their fates were inexplicably linked. The evening shadows stretched long across the shelter's parking lot as Clara finished loading supplies into her car. 3 car seats were carefully secured in the back, ready for their precious cargo. Rebel stood watch near the shelter's entrance, his broad shoulders tense with anticipation. Almost ready, Clara called softly. She checked her watch, just past 7. They'd planned to leave under cover of darkness, taking the children to a temporary safe house before heading to Montana. A flash of headlights swept across the lot. Rebel's head snapped up. 2 black SUVs pulled in, blocking both exits. The Rivers stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by 4 burly men in dark suits. Get the kids, Rebel growled, moving to intercept them. Get them out the back. Clara rushed inside, her heart pounding. The 3 toddlers were sleeping peacefully in their makeshift nursery. She scooped up Danny first, then reached for the other 2. The sound of shattering glass made her jump. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. You can't hide them forever, Mrs. Rivers' voice rang out, cold and sharp. They belong to us. Clara clutched the children close, backing toward the emergency exit. Danny stirred, whimpering softly. Shh, sweetheart, she whispered. It's going to be okay. The door burst open. 2 of the Rivers men filled the doorway, their faces hard and expressionless. Clara turned to run, but her path was blocked by Mr. Rivers himself, his expensive suit incongruous in the humble shelter. Hand them over, he said smoothly. No one needs to get hurt. Never, Clara spat. A crash came from behind her, and Rebel charged into the room like an angry bear. He tackled one of the men, sending them both sprawling. Clara seized her chance, darting toward the exit with the children. Mrs. Rivers grabbed her arm, nails digging in deep. You interfering little... Clara stumbled, twisting to protect the children as she fell. Her head cracked against the edge of a table. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Through the haze, she saw Rebel fighting his way to her. He'd already dispatched 2 of the men, but Mr. Rivers pulled something from his jacket, the metallic glint of a gun. Rebel, Clara screamed. Take them and run! He hesitated for a split second, torn between protecting her and saving the children. Clara pushed the toddlers toward him. Go, she commanded, then kicked out at Mrs. Rivers' legs, buying them precious seconds. Rebel scooped up all 3 children in his massive arms. With a roar of fury, he barreled past Mr. Rivers, knocking the gun aside. He disappeared through the emergency exit, the children safely bundled against his chest. Clara tried to follow, but her vision swam. Mrs. Rivers' heel came down hard on her hand. She cried out in pain. Through the window, she glimpsed Rebel's motorcycle roaring away into the night. The children were safe. That was all that mattered. Mr. Rivers cursed, ordering his remaining men to give chase. But Clara knew they'd never catch Rebel. Not on these winding mountain roads, he knew, like the back of his hand. As consciousness faded, she heard his voice in her mind, rough with emotion. I'll come back for you, Clara, and the Rivers will pay for this. I swear it. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew no more. Clara blinked against the harsh hospital lights, her head throbbing. The white ceiling came into focus, and she became aware of a warm, calloused hand holding hers. Rebel sat beside her bed, his massive frame making the plastic chair look tiny. "The children," she whispered, her throat dry. "Safe," Rebel assured her, his deep voice gentle. "They're with my old friend Sarah, about 50 miles from here. Nobody knows where." Relief flooded through Clara. She tried to sit up, but dizziness made her sink back into the pillows. The doctor had said she had a mild concussion from hitting the table, and her right hand was wrapped in bandages, where Mrs. Rivers' heel had crushed it. "I'm sorry I left you behind," Rebel said, his eyes dark with guilt. "I should have—" "No." Clara squeezed his hand. "You did exactly what you needed to do. The children come first. Always." Rebel's thumb traced circles on her palm, sending tingles up her arm. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Clara Rivers." She managed a weak smile. "Not feeling very brave right now." "Then let me be brave for both of us for a while." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch impossibly gentle for such large hands. Over the next few days, as Clara recovered, Rebel rarely left her side. He helped her with physical therapy exercises for her injured hand, his patience never wavering. When nightmares of the attack jolted her awake, he was there with quiet words of comfort and strong coffee. One afternoon, as they walked slowly around the hospital garden, Clara stopped by a bench overlooking the mountains. "I keep thinking about that night," she admitted. "How quickly everything went wrong." Rebel sat beside her, his shoulder pressed against hers. "You're stronger than you think, Clara. You fought back. You protected those kids like they were your own." "They feel like mine now," she whispered. "Is that crazy?" "No." Rebel's voice was rough with emotion. "I feel the same way. Those 3 little ones. They've changed everything." Clara looked up at him, really looked at him. The fearsome biker exterior was still there, the tattoos, the beard, the massive build. But now she saw beyond it, to the gentle heart beneath. The man who'd dive into an icy creek to save 3 strangers, who'd sit for hours rocking a fussy toddler to sleep. "We can't let the Rivers get them back," she said firmly. "Never." Rebel's jaw set in determination. "I've been thinking. I've got a cabin in Montana, remote, defensible. Nobody knows about it except my most trusted friends." Clara's pulse quickened. "You want us to go there?" "All of us. You, me, the kids." He turned to face her fully. "I know it's asking a lot. You'd have to leave your job, your home, but Clara." He took her hands in his. "We're stronger together. These past few days have shown me that." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about her empty apartment, the lonely years since her husband's death. Then she thought about the way Danny's face lit up when he saw her, how the other 2 toddlers reached for her with complete trust. She thought about Rebel, this unexpected guardian angel in leather and denim, who'd brought new purpose to her life. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's do it. Let's take our children somewhere safe." Rebel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close, careful of her injuries, and Clara felt the rightness of it all. Sometimes family wasn't what you were born into, but what you chose to build together. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their escape, knowing the road ahead would be challenging, but certain they could face anything as long as they had each other. The law office of Harrison and Associates towered over Main Street, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun. Clara smoothed her skirt nervously as she and Rebel waited in the reception area. Her hand, still tender from the injury, rested in Rebel's larger one. "Mr. Davidson will see you now," the receptionist announced, gesturing toward a heavy wooden door. Inside the office, James Davidson, a seasoned lawyer with salt and pepper hair, studied the stack of documents spread across his desk. Photos of the children's injuries, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and sworn testimonies from former Rivers employees filled manila folders. "This is quite compelling," Davidson said, adjusting his reading glasses. The evidence of neglect alone would be enough, but the money laundering angle. He whistled low. That's what will really sink them. Clara leaned forward. But is it enough? The Rivers have connections everywhere. They used to, Rebel added, his deep voice rumbling with satisfaction. But my contacts tell me their so-called friends are jumping ship. Nobody wants to be associated with child abusers. Davidson nodded, shuffling through more papers. The medical reports from when you found the children are damning. Hypothermia, malnutrition, unexplained bruising. No judge will look kindly on that. We have the testimony from their former nanny, too, Clara reminded them. She documented everything. Yes, Maria Rodriguez. Davidson held up a sworn statement. Her detailed accounts of the Rivers' neglect and emotional abuse are particularly compelling. And the financial records Mr. Rivers' former accountant provided? He tapped another folder. These prove they were using the adoption as a cover for moving illegal funds. Rebel's hand tightened around Clara's. So, what happens now? I've already contacted Judge Henderson. She's reviewing the emergency custody petition as we speak. Davidson reached for his phone as it buzzed. He read the message, a smile spreading across his face. Speaking of which, Clara held her breath. The judge has approved the petition. The police are serving the warrant right now. Davidson looked up at them. The Rivers will be arrested within the hour. Clara sagged with relief, tears springing to her eyes. Rebel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his own body tense with emotion. What about the children? Clara asked. They'll remain in protective custody for now, Davidson explained. Given your role as their social worker and primary caregiver these past weeks, you'll maintain temporary custody, Clara. The court recognizes the bond that's formed. Through the office windows, they could see police cars racing down Main Street, lights flashing. Rebel stood and helped Clara to her feet. We should get back to the kids, he said softly. At the shelter, they found the 3 toddlers napping peacefully under Sarah's watchful eye. Danny stirred as Clara entered, reaching for her with sleepy arms. She gathered him close, breathing in his baby powder scent. Rebel's phone buzzed. He checked it and nodded to Clara. It's done. The Rivers are in custody. Clara closed her eyes, holding Danny tighter. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, after all the close calls and sleepless nights, they'd finally done it. The children were safe. They can't hurt anyone anymore, Rebel said, sitting beside her and gathering the other 2 sleeping toddlers close. His voice was thick with emotion as he watched their peaceful faces. Clara looked at this unlikely family they'd created. A former biker, a widow, and 3 rescued children. Against all odds, they'd won this battle. The Rivers' power was broken, their true nature exposed to the world. Clara's phone rang just as she was tucking the youngest toddler into bed. The caller ID showed the police station's number. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. Ms. Rivers, the Rivers have escaped custody. Officer Thompson's voice crackled through the speaker. They overpowered 2 guards during transport. We believe they're heading your way. Clara's hands trembled as she ended the call. Rebel! She shouted, her voice tight with panic. Rebel burst through the door, his expression darkening as Clara relayed the news. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. Get the kids. We need to move. Now. Clara scooped up the sleeping toddler, while Rebel gathered the other 2. They rushed to his truck, securing the children in their car seats with practiced efficiency. The night was pitch black, with only a sliver of moon peeking through heavy clouds. The safe house, Clara whispered, climbing into the passenger seat. It's our best chance. Rebel gunned the engine, and they roared down the empty streets. The children, stirred from their sleep, remained surprisingly quiet, as if sensing the tension in the air. Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, growing larger by the second. Clara's grip tightened on the armrest. It's them! Hold on, Rebel growled, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow back road. The truck bounced over the uneven surface, but Rebel handled it with skill born from years of motorcycle riding. The pursuing vehicle stayed close, its high beams flooding their cab with harsh light. Clara twisted in her seat to check on the children. They were wide-eyed but calm, trusting in their protectors. "They're getting closer," Clara warned, her heart pounding as she recognized Mrs. Rivers behind the wheel of the pursuing car. Rebel's jaw clenched. Not for long. He took another turn, this time onto an old logging road he knew from his riding days. The truck's four-wheel drive handled the rough terrain, but the Rivers' luxury sedan struggled to keep up. Branches scraped against the windows as they plowed through the undergrowth. The children whimpered, and Clara reached back to squeeze their hands reassuringly. "It's okay, babies. We've got you." Rebel's phone buzzed on the dashboard. Officer Thompson had sent their location to all nearby units. Help was coming, but they needed to stay ahead of the Rivers until then. The logging road curved sharply around a steep hillside. Rebel slowed just enough to navigate the turns safely, while behind them, the Rivers' car skidded in the loose gravel. Clara watched in the side mirror as their pursuers struggled to maintain control. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees ahead. Police cars were blocking the road's exit, creating a barrier the Rivers couldn't pass. "Hold tight," Rebel ordered, expertly maneuvering their truck to a stop behind the police line. The Rivers' car came careening around the final bend. Mrs. Rivers saw the roadblock too late. She slammed on the brakes, but the car spun out on the gravel, coming to rest against a tree. Officers swarmed the crashed vehicle, weapons drawn. This time, there would be no escape. Clara watched as the Rivers were dragged from their car and cuffed, their faces twisted with rage and defeat. Officer Thompson approached their truck. "You're safe now," he assured them. "We'll need statements, but that can wait until morning." Clara sagged against Rebel's shoulder, the adrenaline draining from her body. In the back seat, the children had fallen back asleep, unaware of how close they'd come to danger. Rebel stood at the kitchen window of their new home, watching the sunrise paint the sky in gentle pinks and oranges. His reflection in the glass caught his eye. The same thick beard, the same tattoos snaking down his arms, but something was different. The hardness in his eyes had softened, replaced by a warmth he'd never known before. The sound of tiny feet padding across the floor drew his attention. Danny, the oldest of the three toddlers, clutched his stuffed bear as he made his way to Rebel. Without hesitation, Rebel scooped him up, settling the boy against his chest. The simple act still amazed him. How naturally it came now, how right it felt. "Morning, little man," he murmured, his voice gruff with emotion. 6 months ago, he'd been a different person, angry, lost, carrying the weight of his past like armor. He remembered the cold morning he'd found the children in that creek, how that moment had cracked open something inside him he thought had died long ago. The other two toddlers, Emma and Jack, were still asleep upstairs. Their peaceful breathing through the baby monitor was a constant reminder of what he'd gained, what he'd fought to protect. The Rivers couldn't hurt them anymore. The thought brought a fierce pride to his chest. Clara's footsteps on the stairs drew his attention. She appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly mussed from sleep, wearing one of his old t-shirts. The sight of her made his heart skip a beat, just like it had that first day at the shelter when she'd trusted him, despite his rough exterior. "You're up early," she said, moving to join them by the window. She ran a gentle hand through Danny's hair, and the boy snuggled deeper into Rebel's chest. "Just thinking," Rebel replied, shifting to make room for her against his side. "About everything that's changed." Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You're not the same man who walked into my shelter that day." "No," he agreed, looking down at Danny's peaceful face. "That man wouldn't have known what to do with all this." He gestured to their home, to the life they'd built together. The sound of stirring upstairs signaled that Emma and Jack were waking up. Clara squeezed his arm before heading to the kitchen to start breakfast. Rebel followed, still holding Danny. watching as she moved around the kitchen with practiced ease. Soon, the other two toddlers appeared, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They brightened at the sight of Rebel and Clara, no trace of fear or uncertainty in their faces. They'd come so far from those terrified frozen children he'd pulled from the creek. "Pancakes!" Clara asked the kids, and their enthusiastic cheers filled the kitchen with joy. Rebel set Danny down in his booster seat, making sure each child was secure before taking his own place at the table. Clara brought over plates stacked with pancakes, and the familiar chaos of breakfast with 3 toddlers began. As he helped Jack cut his pancakes into bite-sized pieces, Rebel caught Clara's eye across the table. She was smiling, that soft, knowing smile that always seemed to see right through him. He didn't need to say the words aloud. She knew how grateful he was, how much this family meant to him. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming the kitchen and the faces of his loved ones. The man he'd been, the angry, lost soul who'd found 3 freezing children in a creek, was gone. In his place sat a father, a partner, a protector. And for the first time in his life, Rebel felt truly at peace. After breakfast, while the kids played with their toys in the living room, Rebel and Clara sat at the kitchen table. Their coffee cups steamed between them, a comfortable silence settling in the morning light. Through the doorway, they could see Emma stacking blocks while Jack and Danny shared a picture book. Clara wrapped her hands around her mug, her eyes soft, as she watched the children. "I keep thinking about how far we've come," she said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday when you brought them to the shelter." Rebel nodded, his rough fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Never thought I'd be sitting here like this, having breakfast with 3 kids, making plans for the future." He paused, studying Clara's face. "What do you think comes next?" "Well," Clara said, shifting in her chair, "the Rivers are in prison. But we still need to sort out the legal custody situation. The children need stability, a permanent home." "They've been through so much already," Rebel agreed. His gaze drifted to the children again, watching as Danny helped Jack turn a page in their book. "But they're healing. I see it every day." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "We all are, but there's still work to do. They'll need therapy, support, patience. It won't always be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Rebel said, his voice low and determined. He squeezed her hand gently. "But we'll face it together, right?" "Together," Clara confirmed, her eyes meeting his. "They trust us now. They feel safe here." Rebel's expression softened as Emma toddled over to show him a crayon drawing. He lifted her onto his lap, studying the colorful scribbles with genuine interest. "What's this, sweetheart?" "Family," Emma declared proudly, pointing to the various stick figures on the paper. Clara leaned in to look, and Emma beamed at them both. After the little girl returned to her drawing spot, Rebel's expression grew serious. He turned to Clara, his voice thick with emotion. "They deserve more than temporary arrangements," he said. "They deserve a real home, a real family." Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Rebel took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I want us to adopt them, Clara. All 3 of them, together." His hands were steady as he reached for hers again. "We could make it official, give them the stability they need, a real chance at love and a family." Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she was smiling. "You want us to be their parents, legally?" "Yes," Rebel said firmly. "I know it won't be easy. We'll have to jump through hoops, prove ourselves to the courts. My past might make things complicated." He paused, his expression determined. "But these kids are worth fighting for. And there's no one I'd rather fight alongside than you." The sounds of the children playing filled the moment between them. Danny's gentle encouragement as he helped Jack with the book. Emma's quiet humming as she drew. It was the sound of home, of family, of everything they'd built together. Clara squeezed his hands, her voice steady despite her tears. "You're right. They deserve a real family, and we can give them that." The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, casting warm patches of light across the polished floor. Rebel stood before the mirror in the restroom, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. He'd traded his leather jacket for a crisp dress shirt and slacks, clothes that felt foreign against his skin. His tattoos peeked out from beneath his sleeves, reminders of his past life. "You look fine," Clara said softly from the doorway. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly pulled back. "The judge will see what I see. A man who loves these children more than anything." Rebel's hands dropped to his sides. "Never thought I'd be standing in a courthouse without being in trouble," he admitted, managing a small smile. "But here we are, doing this the right way." They walked together to the courtroom, where their lawyer waited with the children. Emma wore a pink dress with tiny flowers, while Jack and Danny matched in little bow ties. The sight of them, cleaned up and beaming, made Rebel's heart swell. The adoption hearing was surprisingly simple. The judge reviewed their paperwork, asked them questions about their commitment to the children, and listened to character testimonies from their social worker and friends from the community. Rebel's past came up, as expected, but their lawyer presented evidence of his transformation, letters from employers, community members, and even the shelter where he'd first brought the children. "Mr. Rebel," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "I see here that you've made significant changes in your life. What motivated this transformation?" Rebel cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "These kids, Your Honor, finding them that day, it wasn't just about saving their lives. They saved mine too. They showed me what it means to be needed, to be trusted." He glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "And with Clara's help, I learned what it means to be part of a real family." The judge's expression softened as she watched Emma climb onto Rebel's lap, completely at ease with the man who had once struck fear into others. Danny and Jack stood close to Clara, holding her hands and watching the proceedings with curious eyes. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the judge smiled. "Having reviewed all the evidence and testimonies, I find it in the best interest of these children to grant this adoption. Congratulations, you are now legally a family." Clara burst into tears of joy, and Rebel felt his own eyes growing damp. The children, picking up on the happy atmosphere, began to cheer. Their lawyer snapped pictures as they signed the final paperwork, capturing the moment their family became official. As they left the courthouse, Danny tugged on Rebel's sleeve. "Does this mean we can call you Daddy now?" he asked, his eyes bright with hope. Rebel knelt down, his heart full to bursting. "Yeah, buddy, if that's what you want." "Daddy!" Emma squealed, throwing her arms around his neck. Jack joined in, and soon all three children were hugging him tightly. Clara watched them, her eyes shining with happy tears. This was more than she'd ever hoped for after losing her husband. A new kind of love, a family built from both tragedy and triumph. She saw in Rebel's face the same peace she felt in her heart, the certainty that they had found exactly where they belonged. "Daddy," Danny said again, testing out the word with a grin. "I like that better than Rebel." Rebel laughed, holding his children close, meeting Clara's gaze over their heads. In her smile, he saw their future. School plays and skinned knees, bedtime stories and birthday parties, all the moments that made up a family's life. For the first time in his life, he felt completely at peace. The morning after the adoption, Rebel woke early to the sound of little feet padding down the hallway. He smiled, still getting used to these gentle morning sounds instead of the roar of motorcycles. The house they'd bought together, a modest 3-bedroom with a big backyard, was already showing signs of their new life. Crayon drawings decorated the fridge. Tiny shoes lined the entryway, and toys were scattered across the living room floor. "Daddy!" Emma called out, pushing open their bedroom door. Her curly hair was a mess, her princess pajamas wrinkled from sleep. "Can we have pancakes?" Clara stirred beside him, her eyes opening slowly. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to smooth Emma's wild hair. "Pancakes!" Jack and Danny's voices echoed from the hallway, and soon all three children had piled onto the bed, bouncing with excitement. Rebel caught Danny mid-bounce, tickling him until he squealed with laughter. All right, pancakes it is." He looked at his family, still amazed that this was his life now. The tough biker who once struck fear into others was now wearing flannel pajama pants with little motorcycles on them. A gag gift from Clara that the kids had loved. In the kitchen, Clara helped the children measure flour, while Rebel mixed the batter. She'd taught him how to cook proper meals, replacing his diet of takeout and microwave dinners. Now their kitchen was always full of warmth and the smell of home-cooked food. "Remember when you first tried to make these?" Clara teased, wiping flour from Danny's nose. "You nearly burned down the shelter's kitchen." Rebel chuckled, flipping a perfectly golden pancake. "Yeah, well, I had a good teacher." He caught her eye across the kitchen island, remembering those early days when they were just learning to trust each other. Now, he couldn't imagine life without her patient guidance and unwavering support. Jack tugged at Rebel's shirt, holding up his latest drawing. "Look, Daddy, it's our family." The crayon picture showed 5 stick figures, the tallest one covered in squiggly lines that were supposed to be tattoos. "That's beautiful, buddy," Rebel said, his voice rough with emotion. He hung it on the fridge alongside dozens of others, each one a testament to their growing bond. After breakfast, they moved to the backyard. Rebel had built a swing set last weekend, and the kids couldn't get enough of it. As he pushed Emma higher and higher, her delighted squeals filling the air, he caught sight of Clara sitting on the porch steps. She was watching them with such love in her eyes that it made his heart ache in the best way possible. Danny and Jack were taking turns going down the slide, their laughter infectious. These were the same children he'd pulled from that icy creek, but they were transformed now, happy, healthy, and secure in the knowledge that they were loved. Clara joined them, wrapping her arms around Rebel's waist as they watched the children play. "You know," she said softly, "when I lost my husband, I thought I'd never find happiness again. But look at us now." Rebel pulled her closer, thinking about how far they'd come. The dangerous confrontations with the rivers, the legal battles, the nights spent worrying, all of it had led to this moment. His weathered hands, once used for fighting, now gently pushed his daughter on a swing. His voice, once raised in anger, now read bedtime stories and soothed away nightmares. Looking at Clara and their children, Rebel knew with absolute certainty that every challenge they'd faced had been worth it. This was what he'd been searching for all his life, not the false brotherhood of a motorcycle gang, but the true belonging of a family built on love, trust, and second chances. Through the kitchen window, Rebel watched the children playing in the afternoon sun. Emma was showing her brothers how to make daisy chains, something Clara had taught her last weekend. Jack and Danny sat beside her in the grass, their small hands fumbling with the delicate flowers, but trying their best to copy their sister's movements. The sight made his chest tighten with emotion. These peaceful moments still caught him off guard sometimes. The simple joy of watching his children play without fear or worry. The scratched-up Harley in the garage was gathering dust these days, but Rebel didn't mind. He'd traded the thunder of engines for the music of children's laughter, and he couldn't be happier about it. Emma looked up and waved, her smile bright enough to light up the whole yard. "Daddy, look," she called out, holding up a crooked chain of daisies. "It's a crown." Rebel gave her a thumbs up, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. His tattoos, once symbols of a life he'd left behind, now told different stories. Just last week, Danny had traced the faded ink on his arm and asked what each picture meant. Rebel had turned them into stories about brave knights and magical adventures, transforming his past into fairy tales that made his children's eyes shine with wonder. The screen door creaked, and Clara's familiar footsteps approached. She slipped her arm around his waist, fitting perfectly against his side, like she'd always belonged there. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, her voice soft and knowing. Rebel pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with the cookies they'd baked earlier. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," he said, his deep voice gentle. A year ago, you were saving 3 children from freezing to death," Clara finished for him, squeezing his hand, "and changing all our lives in the process." Outside, Jack had managed to make a wobbly daisy chain of his own. He placed it proudly on Danny's head, making his brother giggle. The sound carried through the open window, filling the kitchen with joy. "Remember when they were too scared to even smile?" Clara asked, her eyes misty with memory. "Now look at them." Rebel nodded, thinking about those first few weeks after rescuing the children. How they'd flinched at sudden movements. How they'd hoarded food under their pillows. How they'd woken up screaming from nightmares. The transformation seemed almost miraculous now. The afternoon sun painted everything in warm, golden light. The kids had abandoned their daisy chains and were now chasing each other around the yard, their bare feet kicking up tufts of grass. Their homemade tie-dye shirts, a messy but fun family project from last weekend, made them look like running rainbows. Clara moved to stand in front of Rebel, wrapping both arms around his waist and looking up at him. The sunlight caught the silver strands in her hair, making them shine. She'd stopped coloring it a few months ago, saying she'd earned every one of those gray hairs keeping up with 4 children, counting Rebel as the biggest kid of all. Rebel cupped her face in his hands, still amazed that this incredible woman had chosen to build a life with him. His calloused thumbs brushed her cheeks, and he saw in her eyes the same contentment he felt in his heart. "We did it," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "We're home." Clara's smile was radiant as she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the laugh lines that had replaced his permanent scowl. Their family was whole, their love was strong, and their future was bright with promise. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.